Okay, the objection that the evangelicals and other many Christians have about God being in the form of man, or that man would be in the image of God, literally, as it says in Genesis account. They say that no, that God being created in the image of man being created in the image of God and in the likeness of God means only that man is different from animals, that he has a rational soul, so he's that kind of way like God. Now, that's not very good, because the same the same person who wrote the Genesis chapter, or the whole book of Genesis, in the 5th chapter, he describes similar situation again. He says, "In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him, and male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam in the day when they were created." Okay, and then verse 3 of chapter 5 says, "And Adam lived 130 years, and begot a son in his own likeness, after his image, and called his name Seth." So Seth, Adam begot him in his image and in his likeness, using the exactly same Hebrew words that were used about creation of Adam, how Adam was in the image and likeness of God. So if it means, as some people say, that the image and likeness of God means only that the man has a rational soul, different from animals, then we also have to conclude with the same interpretation that Seth was the only son of Adam that had a rational soul, because Seth is the only son that is explained to actually also be created in his image. So this interpretation about rational soul is very contradictory, and doesn't make any sense at all. Why can't you just take it as it says? And that's how it is. Okay, sometimes people also object about the wings. That Bible also says sometimes that God has wings, and make that you can't take those scriptures about God having a body to be literal, because some places say that he has wings. But you can compare those places, which ones are literal and which ones are not literal. For example, psalmist might be speaking about God covering people under his wings or under his feathers. Now, obviously that seems more symbolic, especially when you think about it in Matthew 23 and 37. Jesus says, "How often would I have gathered thy children together, even as hen gathered her chickens under her wings, and ye would not." So that's very similar metaphor. But when Moses only says about God being angry and going past him, and you can see his back parts, that doesn't really have any symbolical or spiritual meaning now, does it? No? So you can really take that kind of thing more literal. So that way the wing part doesn't really convince anybody. Okay, here's a quote. This is from Tertullian against Praxeas, Ante-Nicene Fathers, chapter 3, verse 602. So that is the source where the quote comes from. Okay, and this is from the Christian writer Tertullian, about 200 AD, and he wrote, "For who will deny that God is a body, although God is a spirit? For the spirit has a bodily substance of its own kind in its own form." So Tertullian seems to think that he had a body, and he lived in the early Christian period. Okay, to understand a little bit about why the beliefs changed a little bit about the God's nature, we can read from J.W.C. Wand, A History of the Early Church to AD 500, London, Methuen and Company, 1937, published. Okay, and this is a quote from this book. Okay, it says, "It is easy to see what influence this school of thought, Neoplatonism, must have had upon Christian leaders. It was from it that they learned what was involved in a metaphysical sense by calling God a spirit. They were also helped to free themselves from their primitive eschatology and to get rid of their crude anthropomorphism, which made even Tertullian believe that God had a material body." So Neoplatonism can be thanked for the beliefs. some people do object and say that no, Christians have always from the beginning believed that God has no body, nor substance, no form of any kind, and that's not true. I'll quote a little bit more early church fathers and stuff. Okay, this is Origen on First Principles, Preface 9, Ante-Nicene Fathers, chapter 4, verse 6. Okay, now Origen, he wrote this about 225 AD. For it is also to be a subject of investigation how God himself is to be understood, whether as a corporeal and formed according to some shape, or of a different nature from bodies, a point which is not clearly indicated in our teaching. So obviously, if the Christians have always believed in such a thing, why is that Origen, who didn't believe in it, still said that, made it clear that there's disputation about it, and it's not clearly indicated anywhere. So it's not a doctrine that has always been set somehow in stone. Okay, now we quote Origen, Homilies on Genesis, chapter 3, verse 1, Ante-Nicene Fathers. Okay, and this the quote comes that the Jews indeed, but also some of our people, supposed that God should be understood as a man, that is, adorned with human members and human appearance, but the philosophers despised these stories as fabulous and formed in the likeness of poetic fiction. So the Jews and Christians seem to be believing in such a thing, but because of the those philosophers, and other kind of people who were supposed to be learned, because they didn't believe in it. It's somehow supposed to be fiction now. Since when did those philosophers receive the keys of the kingdom of heaven to teach the nature of God? If the Christians and Jews seem to believe in it before these guys, so I think it was the Greek philosophy that changed the idea, not Mormons, or not the fact that they always believed in a God without body parts or passions. Remember that Jeremiah, he actually warned people about God who cannot speak or smell nor hear or see, or without any passions or without anything. So why is that many Christians want to create God to be something like that, when Jeremiah said no for God like that? So I conclude that the scriptures are clear about God's corporeal nature, that it never refutes the idea. There's only some interpretations that do, but the scriptures don't. But there's a lot more scriptures to indicate that he has a body. And also the Ante-Nicene Fathers seem to be clear that there was disputation about that and that. And Tertullian seemed to believe in it, and he lived before Origen, so that's pretty clear to me.